It's absolutely fantastic that he was able to join us because of previous commitments he has coming down the road. He's going to be tying parachute flies with us, something I always need help with the posts. And the last thing I wanted to say is thank you very much, Sheldon, for joining us, and take it away.
So these are the flies. These are typical of the size that I tie them in, sort of 14, 16. The blue-winged olives I tie down to size 28, and I don't use them very much. But I'm going to tie these in a little bit larger style and a little bit brighter colors so they'll show up a little better. As Brian mentioned, a lot of people have told me in the past that they have trouble with parachute flies. They have trouble with the post and all that kind. And I'm going to show you the way I do it first, just to get us started. And hopefully you'll find the method that I use will work for you as well. Okay. So we're going to tie, laughingly, a blue-winged olive on a size 10 dry fly. But this is just to try and get you a little better perspective of what's going on. You can tell I had to clean up a little. All right. I like to use Antron yarn. I know some people don't like Antron yarn because they say over time the post tends to collapse in your fly box. But all you have to do is just take it and just give it a little twist with between your thumb and your index finger and get it to stand up again. And if it's still giving you a little trouble, put a little floatant in it and it stands up very nicely. So I'm folding my yarn here because it's very fine, but you would normally get a little bit heavier yarn. You can use any kind of artificial wool here. You can use things like Fentex, as long as it's any polypro, anything like that will work. So what I like to do is tie it in the middle. Just take a turn there. I can now position it where I want it and take just 2 turns of thread. Now this is really important when you're tying it down on size 28. You don't want to be building up a lot of thread. You don't have a lot of space. Now to convert this into a post, it's really straightforward. All you got to do is wrap the thread around it above the hook shank. You'll soon get them closed together. And this is the key to making this work. What you want to do is build up, I'd like to say 2 or 3 millimeters, 1/8 of an inch. You can go higher, build it up, and then take your thread and work your way back down to the bottom again. And there it is. There's your post. Now the advantage of this is if you look, you'll see that it's very narrow. And when you put your hackle on here now, the thickness of the yarn will help keep it down and doesn't pop off. I've never had one of my hackles pop off. I've seen other people where it's happened. Now we're going to just make a basic fly now. Just a basic dry fly. We'll need tailing material. Right? So here we have basically any dun hackle will serve. This is sort of a golden dun, but it's done. Close enough. Take about, as much as you can pinch off in your thumb and index finger. Stack them together. Flip ends. Measure it up. In this case, I don't have to do anything. Just tie in. Now you can take a turn of thread under the tail, a couple of turns under the tail, and then one turn sort of on the top, and that will sort of spread the hackle fibers out a little bit, and you get a little bit more of a spread in the tail. And then dubbing, just any appropriate. I like to use rabbit. People use other things. I'll make this one a little bit light. Hopefully you'll be able to see it all right. And one of the things that I do now is I actually dub the whole body right up to the front. You want to get a nice tight noodle, especially on those smaller flies. Spend a second or two, make sure it's nice and tight. Remember that when it gets wet, this will darken up a little in the water. So typically I like to use something that's a little lighter than the fly I am trying to imitate. Spend a little time to make sure you get under the, there you go. Not the best one I've ever done, but it'll serve the purpose. Next is the hackle. Now you notice I haven't tied the hackle in yet. I'm going to tie the hackle in now. And the reason I do it this way is an accident that occurred back when I first started tying. I hadn't yet got thread control under my belt, and I would grab the hackle at this point in order to tie it on and immediately pull it out. So to counter that, I came up with this thing at 3 o'clock in the morning, and I've been using it ever since. What you want to do is strip the stem bare. Just let me bear with me here. Hopefully you can see that. So I got a long stem, you see? It's got to extend from where I'm going to tie in past the post. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use that bare stem to climb the post. And when it starts to flare, I put in my hackle pliers here. And now every turn goes under the previous. So basically, I am now working my way back down my post. And you want to get 5 or 6 turns on. And now I'm just going to hang my hackle pliers down like that. The big problem now, of course, is how do you tie off? Well, what I do is I use the stem now as a pivot. It allows me to just slip my thread up over the eye of the hook without trapping too much of the hackle that I just put on there, because I'm going over it parallel to the hook shank. Now hang it off here now and trim out all the stuff I don't want. There's always a couple of stray fibers. Make sure you have your thread under control and you know where it is, or you'll be starting over. That's never happened to me. Half hitch tool. Just put 1 half hitch. Now it's secure. 3 turns on your half hitch tool. That's like a 3-turn whip finish. I'll do it twice typically. Trim it off. set the height of my post. Oh, something like that. And the idea, the post is not a wing. There's no wing on this fly. The post is basically an indicator. So you can see it on the other side. It becomes very useful, especially when you're getting down since most olives start at 14, more at 16, and very common at 18. So you want it, very hard to see. I'm having trouble finding them when I fish with them. So this handy little, and you don't have to use white. You can use any bright color. I've used pink, I've used chartreuse, whatever I have laying around. All works well, okay? And that is the basic blue-winged olive that I tie. I tie all of my parachute patterns basically the same way here. Let me see if I can find some. You want to turn it over and get some head cement on try not to block the eye. There we are. Okay, straightforward. Okay, if you follow this, this was written up one time by Charlie Meck, who complained about the fact that this antron will collapse in your fly box. My attitude on it is don't leave the fly in the fly box, fish with it. You don't have that problem anymore. So there you go. Oversized, but that's the basic idea. You can tie drakes with this. You can tie anything you want with this basic style. The beauty of course, the parachute is that it always lands on the water correctly. And sit up there nice and pretty. It's not cocked up at a strange angle the way a traditional hackle dry fly is, which doesn't look like anything on the water at all. All the insects you look at on the water are all nice and low and level like that on the water. And the parachute just seems to work that way. And I've been using them for years and years and years with great success. Hans van Klinken's Klinkhamer, which is a wonderful pattern. Essentially, it's like a parachuted nymph or a parachuted emerger. I like to use a fine wire hook for these. You can use a heavier wire one, and some years ago, Partridge actually came up with a line of hooks specifically for Klinkhamers that were designed by Hans, and essentially it's a longer shanked version of one of these scud hooks with a flat area for tying in the parachute post. What I do that's a little different is I just change the angle of my parachute post a little bit here. Let me find some tan thread here. And again, I'll vary the number of layers of this to match the, who's that? That's Brian. Okay. Again, you just need the 3 turns of thread and everything's in place. Now, when you are tying this post in, first get it under control. I got that camera so close I'm occasionally hitting it. There we go. Now, what I will do now is I'll try to lean it forward a little bit. So there, you can see that I'm trying to get the post to lean forward a little bit. Now, the next thing that I like to do with my Klinkhamers is I weight them. Yeah, I know they're dry flies, but nonetheless I weight them. Part of the problem with them is the materials are so buoyant, the fly just lays on the surface, usually on its side. So you actually have to give them a little extra oomph at the back to get them down. So what I do is I just put on a little silver tag, or if I don't want it to be part of the body of the fly, I'll just hide it under the body material. But typically I will just make it a feature. Half a dozen turns or so, right at the base. Give it a little bright spot. Like that. Done. Now what that will do is it will help the back end sit down in the water, and it will float. Essentially, you want it to float like that in the water with the hook well suspended underneath. If you're finding it's not doing that, you may need to use a little bit more wire on the next ones. And now, tan body. You can make this up any way, shape, or form you want. Something else that I will often do, see if I can get it done. I haven't tied one of these in a while, at least not this way, is to do a reverse dub. Dub from front to back. Yeah, too much. And then use the thread, acts as a kind of a rib. And that just has a way of reinforcing the body, helping us live a little longer. I always tell people mine don't last that long. I usually lose them in a tree. For the thorax, peacock yarn, peacock herl. 3 or 4 strands is sufficient. I tie it in behind the post and catch the part at the front a little bit too. Just twist it into a bit of a rope. And now just tie in a, what do I call for, a grizzly, I think. It really doesn't matter. Any color will do. Put a grizzly on it. And when you want to size it, you just want the fibers to go to the back of the body. That's enough. Again, expose the stem. You just stick the stem under the hook eye. You can get a turn on it, pull back a little, and just trap it down. Go up the stem with the bare part. When it starts to flare, catch it, and each turn now is below the previous. 2, 3, 4, 5. Well, 5 looks good. Again, just sneak the thread up over the hook eye like that. Quick trim. Half hitch. And then the 3 turn half hitches again. Set the height. Yeah, that looks good. The nice thing about this contraption too is if you like to do a dry and dropper, this is a good fly for that. It sets up in the water nicely, and because of the way the hackle works on it, it's resistant to a small nymph pulling it under. So you sort of a dry and dropper, clink and dink, I think is what they refer to this as. Just a little tiny nymph or something underneath. And I've caught a lot of fish on that dropper. There is a pattern out there called the Parasol. And the Parasol is an interesting attempt to try and get the fly to sit under the surface but level. Okay? And as you can see, it has a post on it, but it's taller. And tying the hackle on here is a bit of a challenge. So I'm going to show you how I go about doing that. And then basically you put any kind of a soft hackle or a little nymph or anything like that looks like that. The idea here is that it's sort of rising as an emerger coming out of the water. But this is a bear to cast. Brian mentioned a swivel. A swivel between your tippet and leader is essential with this fly, or after half a dozen casts or so, it'll look like a plate of spaghetti, your whole leader. It just twists it up so badly. But goes at a point that is sort of between the 1/4 and 1/3 back from the hook eye. All right, something in that range. I don't know how better else to describe it. Okay, so again, Antron yarn. I have used snowshoe rabbit for this. It's not always a good, well, normally I wouldn't be tying it on something this large, so bear with me here a moment. There we go. Okay. Again, we're going to make our post, just as we have been all along, to start. And the only difference between this post and the previous ones is how high up we will go. You're just not going to behave yourself. I'm going to have to put you down just a little deeper. There we go. That's better. So, whereas the other one is 1/8 of an inch, this is more like 1/4 of an inch, even higher. And then work your way back up. And now we will start down. Okay. Now this case, we're going to put the hackle on first. And the challenge is that you have to put the hackle on at the top and wrap everything at the top and leave that gap in between. So I like to use anything that's barred. I think it adds a little life, though I don't think it really matters all that much in this case. And this is where things can get sort of silly when you start talking about people tying off on posts and things like that, because that's essentially what we're going to do here. I'm going to strip this stem. So basically it's the height of my post. Catch it in down here on the hook. And then incorporate it into the post. Hit cement the post. Stiffens it up. You can use the UV resin in this, works as well too. Now that should work a little better. Of course, it's always more difficult to do it when you've got people watching you. It's normally not this difficult, but I'm trying to tie it on a very large hook, so. All right. Come on, you piece of junk. And after you get a few turns up there at the top of the post, just hang it down like this. Take your thread around and trap the end of the feather against the post like that. Work your way back up. Make sure you get a nice definition. And then back down again. You can trim this part off. There we are. And now you just finish this fly as you would any other. Take a little bit of some kind of soft hackle. You want stuff that will encourage it to sink a little bit. Try not to trap the hackles in too much. There we go. It's a lot easier on a smaller fly. Dub the body up, hare's ear, anything like that. Spend a little time, get your noodle small. Remember, you're making an insect. And you notice I'm working my way under the hackle as I go. And perhaps a little bit more of the soft hackle here. There's a false throat. Sometimes if you've got one of these, it's a little easier to turn it over. There we are. And there you have Parasol. And again, set your indicator. This looks very big and heavy and crude, and it is because I'm doing it on a size 10 hook, and I would normally be doing this on a 16, 14 or 16. So there you go. That's the basic idea anyway. So there's only one more left, and I call this fly the umbrella fly. It is not an original idea or an original fly. I just don't remember where the heck I saw it from or what it was called. But the idea is straightforward enough. Most of the time when we start thinking of parachute flies, you know, we think of this sort of thing with the hook lying flat on the surface and with all the advantages of it. But fish aren't that smart. They don't and it's a good thing, because if they were, we'd all be in trouble. What they're looking for more than anything else is the dimpling of the insect's feet in the surface film. And these patterns don't do that very well. What we get is the body, and then you get the, but if you look at the insects on the surface, the body is actually just above the surface. Or if it's an emerger, it's just below the surface. So being a lazy guy, I had to come up with a pattern that I could tie fairly quickly and would give me that imitation in the surface film. So you'll like this, Brian, because I've been trying them up at the Franklin Club and they work like stink. So again, I'm going to tie this on a 10. Again, it is not something I would tie it on. I would normally tie this on a 16 because I'm really trying to imitate midges as they're emerging. And as you probably are aware, midges are available to the fish 365 days a year. I've been ice fishing and had midges emerge out the hole in the middle of the damn winter. So midges are always around. And everyone's very afraid about tying them because they're so small. But the fish don't care. They'll eat them anyway, even if they're oversized. Okay. So in its simplest form, a black version of this, and I will tie them in red, I'll tie them in chartreuse, I'll tie them in orange. But in its simplest form, start back a little ways from the eye. And this fly, I use the working thread for the body. You can, if you wish, you know, tie in a little bit of a nice bright, go back to about the halfway point, come forward again, go back about 3/4 of the way, come forward again, go back about halfway, and come forward again. And all I'm basically trying to do is make a tiny little body because these insects are small. All right. The hackle is going to go now between the body and the hook eye. But because these things are so dang small, I like to give myself an indicator so I can see them. And that indicator is a little bit of antron. On this one, I'm going to have to use, probably going to have to fold a little bit here. And all I want to do is have that sit straight out from the hook eye. And then what I'm going to do with my thread is I'm going to make myself a nice place to put my hackle. Right? And these are so simple to tie. Use a grizzly, grizzly is good. Cree works well with one of the other colors, but you want your typical size, 1.5 times the hook gate kind of thing. Oh, we'll go with that. Tie it in. You wrap the hackle just like you would on a dry fly. You want it to be as dense as you can make it. Wiggle it in there if you have to. Okay. Lash that with a couple of turns. Lift it up. And you're going to tie off right under the hook eye here. Doesn't take many turns. There we go. And now we can trim out. Get the fine scissor points here. what makes this fly different is that it's designed to sit down in the water this way. Hence the name umbrella fly, because of the J shape of the hook. Looks like you're holding your umbrella. You put floatant only on the hackle. See it there? And that's the way it sits in the water, just like that. And that, believe it or not, works really, really well. And it's kind of simple to make, no? The wing on it here, again, is strictly as an indicator. That's so I can see. Because remember now, the sample that I had here before, there's another variation on this which doesn't have any body, doesn't have any wing, and they tie the hackles in, one facing up and one facing down, so it sort of cuts together. So the upward one is tied below and the downward one is tied above, and they sort of mesh together. And I have no idea what that's called, but I do remember somebody showing up on the west branch of the Ausable River, grinning ear to ear to ear because he caught a whole bunch of really nice fish on that particular pattern. And it's no pattern at all. It's a bare hook with just a hackle on it. We tend to, in my experience, what happens with a fly is kind of interesting. They start off very simple and basic. Then we have to improve them, right? The most basic fly of all is a simple wet fly. It's got a body and it's got a soft hackle, but that isn't good enough for us. Oh no, 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 no. Now we have to add a tag, and then we have to add a thorax, and then we have to put two colors of hackle on it, and then we need a tail now suddenly, and then we need a body hackle. Next thing you know, you've got a fully dressed Atlantic salmon fly. But started out just a simple little idea, but everybody wants to put their little touch on it. And I'm just as guilty of this as anybody else. I mean, it happens all the time. But sometimes just going back to the most basic and simple patterns works really well because, frankly, the fish haven't seen those flies in a very long time.